Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again for Bug of the Month. My name's Jon, and Jared and I are out here on Spinney Reservoir putting these chironomids to the test. So we just got here and sunk some bugs in the lake, and lo and behold, the chironomid in action. So we're actually gonna, the course of this video, we're gonna show you a few different ways to fish this bug and have a good time out here. So here's the fruits of our labor for a chironomid. Whoa! We're gonna have to do a different one.
That's okay. Okay, so what is a chironomid? So a chironomid is a non-biting midge that lives in pretty much all western streams, rivers, lakes, and reservoirs. It looks a lot like a mosquito, if you will. I mean, they range in sizes anywhere from a number 8 hook or a number 10 all the way down through sizes down to a 30 or a 32 even. So a chironomid is a midge and a midge is a chironomid. So basically all chironomids are just big midges. So just how midges in the river and streams hang out predominantly year-round, they do the same thing in lakes and reservoirs. You can find chironomids here all the time, so it's always a good food source to be presenting to fish year-round. Chironomids have a complete life cycle, so what that means is they're going to start out as a larva, they're eventually going to turn into a pupa stage, and from that pupa stage they're going to emerge into an adult. Once they're an adult, they're going to mate and lay eggs and restart the process. So even if there isn't a thick chironomid hatch, never overlook having a chironomid in your rig, simply because chironomids are going to be here all the time. They're always going to be present. They're always going to be a food source for trout. So even in the thickest of calabatus and damsel hatches, you can still pick up fish on chironomid patterns as well. Stillwater fishing nymphs, there's really two main setups to fish nymphs. One's going to be just your typical static nymph rig. Second way is going to be by stripping midges. So the first setup we're going to talk about is the static nymph rig, so just your general indicator bobber nymph rig. So I like to use a 6 or a 7 weight rod, 9 to 10 feet long. Floating line is going to be preferred, so floating line to match that rod weight. Okay, so today we've been fishing fairly deep. So most of the time today we've been fishing 10 to 16 feet of water. So I have been using a slip strike indicator here. So I set up my rig a little differently. So from my fly line here, I run a straight piece of 40 or 30 pound fluorocarbon all the way down to a little swivel, and then I will run straight tippet off of the swivel down to my flies. So 30 pound or 40 pound fluorocarbon to a swivel, usually about 4 to 6 feet of that to the swivel, and then depending on how deep I'm fishing, totally depends on how deep I'm fishing, how much tippet I have running from the swivel down to my flies, and I'll typically have 2 or 3x from the swivel, depending on conditions. So again, we're fishing pretty deep, so I have a slip strike indicator here. If you're fishing within 9-8 feet, I prefer a typical airlock thingamabobber or Oro style indicator. And again, depending on how deep you are, you'll make your leash from your indicator however long. And then I have 3 flies. I have a chironomid and then 2 calabatus here at the end. So I just tie them nice in line, eye to bend on all the hooks here. You can also tie your flies in line on tags, so however you prefer. I don't really think one method exactly works better than the other. So, and right here I have straight 3X going through my flies. So I'm fishing one water column right here. So you see I have all my flies right in line. So the idea here with this rig is if a fish sees one of these flies, it can ideally see all three. The second rig you can run is a rig where you fish multiple depths or multiple water columns. So at the bottom of our rig, we're gonna have a little balanced leech to help anchor everything down. A couple feet up, we have a little chronomid. And then a couple more feet up here, you see how there's quite a bit of distance between flies. And then our top fly here is gonna be a Calvados nymph tied on a tag. So as you see here, we're fishing almost 6 feet of water here. So we're fishing multiple water depths here with this rig. So instead of having the flies right in line, right where one fish can see all three, we're fishing 3 flies at kind of multiple depths here. So same setup throughout, same indicator, same tippet, leader system, same everything. You're just simply going to spread those flies out a lot greater distance to cover those different columns. And that multiple water depth rig is a really good searching rig because it really allows the angler to access multiple depths and really figure out where the fish are feeding heavily at. So instead of focusing right at 13 feet, we could hit 13 feet, 10 feet, and then maybe into 8 feet as well, depending on how our rig's set up. So we can really figure out where those fish are hanging out at and really want to eat at. So with this static indicator rig, all we're gonna do is you're gonna cast your flies out, gonna let them sit. Try to be patient. You want your flies to sink down as naturally as possible. But if there is no movement on the water, it is a really good idea every now and again, intermittently, to give your flies a little strip or to give them a little movement. As fish are swimming around, they can really key in on that subtle little movement. When it's really windy though, the wind will do it for you, so you don't have to worry about stripping those flies in at all, moving around or popping them. The chop will take and jig your flies up and down. So sometimes I like to be a lazy fisherman and just cast out and let them sit. Most of the time, that is my main method. You usually don't have to try too hard from there, but if you find that it's being slow, the fish might be looking for some movement. So give your flies, as they're sitting statically, a little pop, a little strip, or a little jig, just to give them a little bit of movement, because that might just be the ticket that the fish are looking for. So as you're watching your indicator, fish are going to come around, they're going to investigate your flies as they're sitting and hanging statically on the water. Ideally, you want to wait until your indicator is totally submerged underwater. A lot of times, trout, fish in general, will come, look at your flies and investigate and really try to figure out if they're real or not. So a lot of times they can come and nose them, they'll hit them with their nose, or they'll turn around and slap them with their tail. And that'll make your indicator dip and bob. So most of the times you want to be patient and you want to really wait for that indicator to stay submerged, and that's really the indication that those flies are in a fish's mouth. So just be patient. Going back to that little pop or strip, if you are seeing your indicator kind of dip and bob and a fish is playing with it, again, give it a little strip, give it a little pop or pull on your rod to give those flies a little bit of movement, and that might be the ticket to make that fish turn around and come back and eat your flies. And again, be patient. Let your flies sit in one area for an extended period of time. But if you don't find that a fish is eating right there, or you're catching fish in that exact location, then I'm going to pick up my flies and just cast in a different location.
So this is a technique I like for actually all stillwater bugs. I call it the midge strip. There's a bunch of variations of this all over the planet. This is kind of a technique that I found works particularly well in our waters. So I'm using an intermediate type 2 sink line. So it's gonna sink, but it's not gonna sink super quick like a brick. And this is gonna allow me to, depending on how long I let it sit, I'm gonna be able to cover different parts of the water column. If you have seen one thing and a theme in this, it's certain parts of the water column are key. You can be fishing all the right bugs, but not in the right parts of the water. And that can be kind of the key, is to find where those fish are actually cruising and feeding. So as my flies are falling, I'm doing a little bit of a faster strip here. It's more of a crawl. You can do the hand crawl like that. I found it to be more effective to just do these really long kind of drags. And in this, I can mix up my pauses. I can pause 5 seconds, 2 seconds, whatever I want to do here. One of the things I'm going to be trying to do is figure out what strip sequence is actually going to be the best for this technique. And you can't see it, but behind Jared there is the shoreline. So I'm actually casting and fishing parallel to the shoreline. And what I like to do is get in varied distances from the shoreline and do this. And generally you can really find where those fish are cruising along that shoreline. Once you start hitting fish, you're kind of in the right zone. And you're gonna see that really kind of hold true for the next little while when you're fishing. One of the things I like to do with this technique is try to parallel a shoreline. So get in varied distances from a shoreline and do the stripping technique. And it's more of a drag, it's not a strip. You don't want to strip it like a streamer. As you can see, this is just the cadence that I'm using here. We're in about 10 feet of water, so I don't want it to sink super deep. I'm just dragging these bugs just through the water column here. And a lot of times where you get your eats is like right when it's paused or right when you pick that line back up. And in this position, why I like to do this drag instead of a hand crawl is I'm automatically set up for a strip set. So if that fish eats, my strip set can just look something like that, and I have hooked the fish. When I'm stripping this, I want to get it. I'm never in a hurry really to cast my flies out. I've gotten a lot of eats like almost right at the boat. So I'm going to go really slow on getting my line up here to start casting again. And in doing this too, I can always look at my flies and make sure there's not any weeds attached to it or anything like that. Make sure everything still looks good. The cool thing about this technique too is you can basically use it for everything that's in Stillwater. This is one of my favorite ways to fish damsels, calabatus, chronomids work very well, even scuds, leeches. So pretty much anything you're going to come across in Stillwater, you can fish this technique. I always like to have an extra rod rigged up for this technique with that intermediate sink line. This is also a good technique too if you're wind drifting just out in the middle of the lake or on a shoreline. I like to just bomb out a bunch of line and I can just go with the wind and occasionally just tighten the line up and let it drop. It does kind of the same thing here. We're just swimming these bugs in the water. This is a technique too that you can use for all the aquatic bugs in Stillwater. It works really well for calabatus, damsels, scuds, anything that swims very well. This is a really good technique to use. As you can see, I have that little strip set there. I got some tension on my line, and I know it's not the bottom, but I missed the fish. Now, with this system, One of the things I do here is I have a really long leader, and I can't even show you how long this is, but the leader I have on here is probably about 15 feet. And I'm gonna go straight to my intersection where I'm gonna add some tippet. And when I do that, I'm actually gonna use a really long tag here on my triple surgeon's knot. And I can actually attach my first bug there. You can see it's only a couple inches between my main line, my terminal line, and my first fly. If you keep it short like that, it won't wrap around your line. So it keeps it out, but it also keeps it moving freely. If I'm stripping this, it'll keep that bug kind of moving back and forth in the water. And then I always like to have at least 3 feet here before my next bug. And you can fish three flies here for sure. I only have 2 on right now, but that's where I have my chronomid. And I actually attached it using a non-slip mono loop. And what this does is it gives that chronomid a lot of action in the water. So every time I strip it, the resistance from the water can straighten it out, and when I stop, it's actually gonna swing. When chronomids are pupating, they move through the water in this kind of weird form. And actually, sometimes it takes 3 to 5 days for a chronomid to completely mature and hatch. So what they'll do is they'll move up in the water column, and then they'll drop. And they'll move up, and then they'll drop. So by using this non-slip loop on this fly, I can kind of imitate that, and it just gives this fly a lot of action. But it's a pretty basic rig. Again, you could do a shorter distance here between your flies and add a third fly, or I could add a really heavy weighted fly in the middle of the system and really drag my rig down further. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can play with this, but I definitely urge you to try this technique. It's very effective, and it's one of my favorite ways to fish in Stillwater. This little brown on the midge strip.
Thanks for tuning in, guys, for June Bug of the Month. Make sure to check out the tying portion of Tying the Chironomid, so part 1 and part 2.
And we've got a really special Bug of the Month for you coming up next month. One of our favorite bugs, and probably yours too, the Trico Mayfly. That's going to be a fun one. So until next time, as always, thanks for joining us. If you have questions about any of the stuff we talk about, whether it be the rigging, fishing these flies, or tying them, come into the shop, and we're more than happy to help.
See you next time.
When chronomids pupate, they kind of do this up-down motion. So they're moved. When chronomids pupate, they do this up, this. When chronomids pupate, they have this they have no friends just like me.